people's needs are covered, and you have education and health, etc. So we are now we're in a phase where, and also given the sustainable development goals now, you see a different emphasis in development assistance. You are going from aid, a donor, traditional donor-receiver relationship, to a more partnership approach. We see that private investments are going to be key to reaching these sustainable development goals. So that's why we are trying to find ways of using our development assistance smartly and to have a higher impact. And that's where the compact with Africa fits perfectly. Now, we know that Norwegian businesses are already on the continent doing big investments in oil and gas, naturally, and in renewable energy, in agriculture. But what they really like and what they really appreciate is rule of law, transparency, policy certainty, and all these are things that are being discussed very deeply and thoroughly through the compact with Africa. So we're looking at the compact as the most important channel for enhanced dialogue with African political leaders, and that's something that we will not get by just using our development assistance almost randomly or handing it out. This is a structured dialogue that will take us very far, and it's based on a partnership approach, which is something very much needed on this very interesting and fast-growing continent.
Secretary Steff, bring us up to speed on the US's involvement in the compact with Africa.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bronwyn, and it is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here among these honorable ministers, Dr. Adesina. I will say that what I always say is that no one country and no one company nor no one financial mechanism can single-handedly address the challenges nor reap the opportunities that we see here across this continent. That is really our approach to this compact, a compact that the United States of America firmly stands behind, helped compile alongside our partners throughout the G20. I will say that many know that the administration that I come from is a very deal-oriented administration. The success at the end of the day results in additional private sector investment pouring into countries across this continent in a way that not only do they deserve, but the circumstances on the ground clearly warrant. There are so many opportunities, so many ideas across this continent. These ideas, these opportunities, these great infrastructure needs, now is the time. Now is the time to fully implement the objectives that we sought when we worked on the G20 compact with Africa. I will also say that this, like my colleagues have underscored, will not be successful without the full partnership among our respective governments, but most importantly, the private sector that's gathered here today. I'm pleased to say not only was I joined by dozens of U.S. government officials, but I'm more pleased that dozens of U.S. companies have voted with their confidence here across the continent by placing investments over the long term for many, many years. That's what success looks like. And I will say that the robust institutions that we continue to invest in and invest in heavily, whether that's the Millennium Challenge Corporation or our USTDA financing mechanisms that we have, USAID, it's all very much done with the idea of letting industry lead, point the direction, and we will follow. I will also say that on behalf of Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, he led the President's Advisory Council on doing business in Africa, a trip that took him to 4 countries in Africa in July, 3 of which were compact members. It was not coincidental that that was the case. Over $1 billion worth of deals were signed on that trip, investment deals that are happening across those 4 countries, and we look forward to doubling down across those that are involved in the compact and those that will be involved in the compact.
Secretary El-Harba, bring in Canada's voice to the conversation.
Thank you very much, and it's again good to be with you here today. Let me start off by saying that Canada is a trading nation. 1 out of 6 jobs in Canada are dependent on trade. And our government came into office promising to expand our markets, open up, sign new agreements. We're actually the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with all other G7 nations. And we understand that it helps drive growth and creates jobs for Canadians. And Africa is a priority region for our government. Africa certainly has some of the fastest growing economies in the world, some of the youngest populations in the world. There are significant needs and mutual benefits. We intend on continuing to focus more and more on Africa and continue to build relationships, expand our trade and international assistance with them. The Germany initiative is certainly an excellent initiative to help us expand and build on our efforts, and we have already have an agreement with Ghana on a project within the compact, G20 compact with Africa. Our Prime Minister Trudeau, held a session co-hosted by the British Prime Minister and the Presidents of Ghana and Rwanda at the United Nations General Assembly, calling out for investment in Africa with the focus on youth and youth employment. Our also Minister of Finance this year announced new instruments, financial innovative instruments, including FinDev, which we talked about earlier today, and later on today we're signing an MOU with the African Development Bank. So there are a lot of activities that is going on, and we see this as of a strategic interest to Canada, and we certainly are here to listen, to continue to build relationships, and I want to congratulate the African Investment Forum on bringing us together. This is an excellent opportunity for businesses and governments to come together, to learn from each other, and to pursue opportunities together.
Those of you that have been with us from this morning have heard speed, scale, and synergy tabled over and over again. We're going to bring that into the conversation now in terms of the compact with Africa, how we take it to the next stage. I mentioned it is almost 1.5 years old. We have 12 African countries that are a member of the compact with Africa. Minister Mboweni, as South Africa is the only voice on the G20, the African voice on the G20, can you give us a sense of how you are going to speak for Africa when it comes to carving out this relationship further?
Well, we make our contributions in the G20 system, which should benefit the whole world, really. I tried to make the example of the banking system, the financial system. If the global financial system is safe and secure, Africa will, by definition and by logical extension, also benefit from that. Of course, we debate about all kinds of obstacles which are being brought, for example, in the number of economic regulations around the world. If we're able to sort those ones out at that G20 level, that has an impact as well on African countries. But a lot as well has to be done by ourselves as the African countries so that we can expand the compact countries from 12 to 20 to 54 and so on. And some of the issues are basic that we need to do. Setting up, for example, predictable macroeconomic policy frameworks, obtaining a sovereign rating in order to facilitate investment flows, signing double taxation agreements with a number of countries so that corporations can benefit from those arrangements. So it's a conversation that takes place within the G20 set of countries, but also within ourselves on the continent. There's a lot of work we need to do to make ourselves an attractive investment destination. Maybe there's something that we might be missing here. You see, in the 70s and 80s and part of the 90s, the IMF and the World Bank came with a hammer to try and kill a mosquito. And they called it structural adjustment programs, which were imposed on African countries, sometimes making it almost impossible for those countries to manage their affairs. Now, that was the IMF and the World Bank approach at that time. Watch the difference with the Compact for Africa. This is not an imposition of policies on African countries, but it's an encouragement of investment in African countries in a manner which benefits the investor and the African countries.
So, Minister,
that's
even
very,
from
very
the
important.
naming convention, as President Adesina mentioned earlier,
Yes.
this is not the compact for Africa, it's a compact with Africa.
yes.
Just following on your train of
Yes,
thought.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's very important that we approach it like that. And Norway has a very good experience, which maybe the minister will talk about, because the Norwegians noticed that this thing of providing aid is not helpful. It's helpful to some extent, but it's not the solution. So they got together with the Dutch and formed an organization called Arise. They use Arise as an instrument to find local partners in Africa, invest in Africa, so that the local partner has an interest in the development of the business, and by so doing gets the wheels of the economy moving. I think that's a good example.
Secretary Schmidt, speed, scale, synergy. Take me, fast track the compact with Africa to the next stage, and bearing in mind that we don't have time on our hands. And as Minister Mboweni mentioned, we need to pick up those partner countries from 12 to 54, ultimately, and quickly.
Yeah, it's true, but I think quality is also a question. And that's why the compact started with these 12s, and we need the commitments as well. I'd like to stress that it is remarkable that you see the G20 every time they gather now having the compact with Africa as a topic. So you have all the world leaders discussing Africa and doing business with Africa, and everybody, and you see it here on the stage as well, is thinking, what should we do? And as you mentioned, the complete shift in the attitude of IMF and also the World Bank as a whole team, and that's why I said the cooperation with the international finance organizations is just great. As you mentioned, the Berlin summit, I don't know whether everybody is aware, because just a week ago, we had all the heads of the Compact with Africa countries, heads of state, plus the president, plus yourself, coming to Berlin, gathered by Angela Merkel. And we announced there, and there was hard work, as you can imagine, the Ministry of Finance saying, yeah, okay, we give 1 billion of German taxpayer money to a compact for an investment fund. But we thought this is important, and it's benefiting all of us. And so I just want to explain you a little bit what this 1 billion for the 3 years is all about, because it is also a new idea. It's an investment fund. The first thing is, it has 3 elements. The first thing is that it's an equity fund where we want to invest in small and medium-sized enterprises as the backbone of economies and job creation in Africa. That's the first element, and it comes also with additional training and so on. The second element is to bring German small and medium-sized enterprises to Africa and mitigate risks and help them with the knowledge that is here in the room to actually invest and get engaged. Because as you mentioned, for Siemens and those, this is a typical exercise. They know the ground, they've been active here for quite a while. But it's the small and medium-sized, the so-called hidden champions of Germany, the backbone also of our economy, the Mittelstand, that we need to get engaged and see the opportunities. And that is the second element. And the third element then is also addressing them. This is about a network of knowledge sharing within the community also of companies that were never thinking of Africa. because I think all know, once you engage companies and ministers are explaining about opportunities, people are set on fire and they know how great it is. But this is difficult to achieve because normally they would think about Europe and maybe Asia, but Africa is not in everybody's mind all the time. So that is why it is important that we have this network of talking about it. So that is, I think, the perspective. I don't see within the next 3 years all of Africa being compact with Africa countries, but there needs to be an incentive so that we challenge African countries, and as you rightly put, but that is the African side as well, that the African partners need to see what they want to bring to the table, and we will see a few of the examples afterwards. And the G20 countries obviously need to think, for example, how to follow the German example with the 1 billion.
Given the work to date, Secretary Schmidt, you're looking, as we said, the 12 countries that are part of the compact with Africa. Your 3-year horizon, what do you think? We know we won't make 54, but there must have been a number tabled.
Yeah, but first of all, I mean, and you mentioned that about if you compare the numbers, and also it's about the structural reforms that we see in these countries, so that they are actually achieving something. It's not just signing a memorandum of understanding that most of you have witnessed several hundred times, but it's about implementing these reforms and actually providing the business environment. And I would say the quality is more about how much growth in investment do we see. It's not like, okay, let's have X more compact countries. It's about what do we do with the compact countries that we have and to see that they make a difference. And then we have to encourage and have a shining example what you can achieve with the compact so that others will then follow.
Well, we follow this session, in fact, with a number of the countries that are represented in the compact with Africa, who will give us some insight into the policy reforms that they are undergoing as a result of the compact with Africa. President Adesina, let me bring you in. Secretary Schmidt says that we are now, this conversation, compact with Africa, is certainly being tabled at G20 meetings. How do we make sure that we get similar synergies with all conferences across Africa, that the compact with Africa also becomes a significant talking point on the continent?
Yeah, first let me just follow up on something that Minister Schmidt was saying about why not all countries in compact with Africa. Of course, that's the end goal, right? But there must be a demonstration effect, right? Those countries that do the right things attract investments, and that's what we want. Competition is also good. I mean, if you have a country that's not so stable in terms of continuity of policies, capital doesn't like to be troubled. It will move to where it's comfortable.
Capital flows where capital is welcome, sir.
Yeah, exactly, and where it cannot be troubled. And so, competition on good policies is very good. And only after that can you begin to talk about how you scale to so many countries. But the very fact that we're actually having this conversation here is exactly what Compact with Africa and Africa Investment Forum is, that landing strip that I kept talking about. We can say we make improvements in doing business indices, okay. But the only time that I really want to know whether that really means anything is when I want to close a transaction. That's when the rubber meets the road, right? And if I actually move up in my country 8 tenths points in terms of doing business, well, do I also have a quantum increase in terms of investment coming to my countries? And so what we've done here is that the Africa Investment Forum provides that platform for the private sector that wants to come in and actually look into countries in which the policy legal regulatory environment is actually good, and they say, okay, we want to have some transactions and we want to close it on this platform. So that's why the synergy and the partnership between the Compact with Africa and the Africa Investment Forum is very, very important. I do want to say something about the issue of leveraging domestic capital. I'll come back to that again because, at the end of the day, we really have to make sure that we develop instruments that allows us to mobilize huge amount of local domestic capital we have. So things about our capital markets development is going to be very, very important. When you start thinking of businesses, you have to think of how can we lend to them in local currencies, so not just in terms of US-based currencies that actually has the challenges you have with higher interest rate and also the exchange rate risks that are involved. So it's one of the areas that we as G20, we're all thinking about what are those new financial instruments that we can use to leverage domestic capital, and what is the way in which we can actually also ensure that we are innovative. The African Development Bank launched something that's called Room to Run recently, which is the first time that an international multilateral development bank has used synthetic securitization to take away some of the risk we have on our balance sheet. We actually get it to the private sector. So what I want to say is that the Compact with Africa and the Africa Investment Forum, we're going to be also developing and testing different types of financial innovations that will, of course, bring in foreign direct investment, spur a lot of Africa-to-Africa investment, but also allow us to mobilize a huge amount of, or unlock, shall I say, domestic capital that we want and put it to effective use for the right industry and to invest in infrastructure.
President Adesina, I do just want to pick up on this point that the speed element I'm talking about, and I think the Africa Investment Forum gives visibility to the countries in Africa that need to respond to what foreign direct investors are looking for. And that goes back to what Secretary Schmidt was saying. It is about quality. So the speed of execution is required from the governments in Africa and from the policymakers, the regulatory frameworks. So I'm going to bring in Secretary Holte in here and ask you what Norway looks for in terms of engagement, investment. We've already made the point, capital flows where capital is welcome. How can Africa really encourage foreign direct investment onto the continent?
Well, I think that's a question I could be sitting here and talking about for hours, but I will not.
Unfortunately, about 3 minutes, if you can do it in that, we're good.
Yeah. But I mean, first of all, thank you for the kind words, Minister Mobeli, on our new approach here, actually, because we are increasingly looking at doing blended finance and using local partners in our development finance initiatives. And what's great is that it's paying off very well for the investors. We have the development finance initiative called Norfund, which is doing investments here. They have an office here in South Africa, and they are getting returns at around 10% every year. And I try to tell Norwegian investors that look at these numbers, and we have too few Norwegian investors coming in here. So I'm trying to show them the numbers. What we are. And we have some Norwegian companies now going into countries like Ghana and Ethiopia with very, very big capital-intensive investments. In the oil and gas sector, it's Aker Energy, and in Ethiopia, it's Yara with a fertilizer mine, potash mine. And these are long-term investments. So what they are really looking for is policy certainty over very long periods, and a very clear political commitment, not only from governments necessarily, but also from parliaments, or having seeing a broad consensus of what are the sectors you're going to develop and which laws and taxes and regulations will apply for the very long term. Because
so Ethiopia and Ghana, in your view, doing the right things.
Yeah, but we are also specifically looking at Ghana and Tunisia in our Compact with Africa work. But they are doing the right thing. Of course, there will always be hurdles to big investments in any country, but the policy certainty over a long term. That's really important if you want to attract the big investments.
Secretary Steff, can you add to that conversation that policy certainty is the center piece for investment and for countries like the United States to open up their investment taps to the African continent?
Sure. It's the fundamental underlying principle. This long-term certainty is in parallel to long-term projects, and that's what we're talking about, a long-term project, long-term commitments, and it goes hand in hand, this long-term certainty that my colleague from Norway was talking about. I also say that agility, the speed, the capacity to deliver, we all have to look internally to make sure our respective institutions are capable of addressing some of these opportunities and and challenges. We did that in the United States when we looked at the BUILD Act, which created the International Development Finance Corporation, OPIC. My colleagues, I mentioned them, many of you know them here today. We heard from investors here, the companies, and we ended up increasing the cap there, doubling it to $60 billion. We ended up hearing from many that equity came into play, so we authorized equity stakes that corporation will now be capable of engaging in. So I think that will have tremendous opportunities throughout the continent, and I'm very pleased that that has been very well received. I will also say, again, just results driven. I think this compact with Africa, we just need to look at the results. The companies have, again, been here for many years, and they will continue to invest. I met with many of them throughout the course of the last couple of years in South Africa. Thousands of jobs, billions of dollars of investment. I'll be heading to Ghana tomorrow. Ghana is another positive example of very pro-minded investment reforms. So I think the opportunity is limitless. The one thing that we haven't talked about is the innovation ecosystem that it goes, again, without saying. If we get this right, the innovation ecosystem that this next young generation is so capable of delivering on, if this investment form really leads the way into the innovation ecosystem of tomorrow.
We've got 10 minutes left, and Secretary Al-Habra, I'm going to come to you on this. We started off the plenary session today in a boardroom in Africa. We've now got a boardroom, and we've got global players in that boardroom. So we are going to ask the question, what is the message to the countries in Africa in terms of their regulatory frameworks, in terms of their leadership? What do they need to do for the compact with Africa to open up to them with open arms? Secretary Al-Habra, I'll start with you, and then we'll move back down the panel and end with the Honourable Finance Minister of South Africa. So,
I think for starters, fora like this are doing an excellent job bringing governments and businesses together, building personal relationships, hearing directly from each other about the projects, the opportunities, regulations, government policies, and dealing with it directly, because there's no substitute for personal relationships. And the more we have opportunities like this one today or this week, I think the better we'll have on expediting or advancing the compact. Second, as was mentioned earlier, I think the real or perceived issues with perception of the business environment in Africa needs to be addressed and responded to. Businesses have questions about certainty, and those questions, if they remain hanging, it could delay or even dissuade businesses from investing. Third is innovative financing that brings businesses and governments together, so public-private partnership to invest in projects that are quite viable. I mean, we know that there's a need for large infrastructure projects, energy projects that we know are viable. And if we even bring government and private sector, you can minimize some of the risks. So if we continue to come up with these innovative instruments, I think it will expedite or expand the opportunities for furthering the compact.
Secretary Stiff, the U.S. has the mic.
I'll say that, one, I think the commitment from this entire group and the commitment of our audience, this has been a tremendous step, and I really applaud our South African host for gathering the best of the best here over the last couple of hours, beginning this morning and going for the next couple of the agenda is spot on. And why the agenda is spot on? Because I think we're having honest conversations with each other regarding what will influence that next deal. What will be the fundamental policies, set of policies that will encourage that next billion-dollar idea happening here in Africa in partnership with some of the greatest companies in the world. That is a conversation that this forum has provided. I would say that, again, listening to the companies that I've chatted with throughout the course of the day from the U.S. and many other countries that are here, this long-term certainty, transparency, is just fundamentally important. And I just want to underscore this compact, a compact that brought us together. Let's take it to the next level and let's implement and measure against it.
So let's take it to the next level. Norway, Secretary Cote.
Yes, thank you. I mean, meeting places like these are great, and it really emphasizes the double-edged commitment here that countries like Norway, we are providing investment. We are even having Norway African business forums in Norway as well, and there's a commitment for also policy reform in African countries. And I mean, transparency it's going to be vital. We have our Oil for Development program, which enables African countries to extract mineral wealth in a responsible way, and transparency is a key issue there as well. But in general, I must say, policies for inclusive growth is a topic in countries in Europe as well, because we see that growth has to be inclusive to be sustainable and to maintain I mean an equal growth opportunities, and that goes for African countries too. And we are sitting here, I see now, in a panel with just men and a moderator, of course, but there is a great potential for tapping female entrepreneurs, women in the workplace, because it's a huge unused economic opportunity as well. Yeah, thanks. Disregarding 50% of your labor force, it's not very sound economics, and it's not good development. So, and I know that the G20 countries are also very mindful of that aspect.
President Adesina, as we build towards the close, sir.
Yeah, I think clearly political leadership matters. That's what I would say. Good governance matters quite a lot in how we're going to be able to succeed with this. And policy predictability is one of the biggest things. Policies have to be predictable when you're making all these investments. Of course, the big elephant in the room is corruption. We have to tackle corruption head on. And that's very, very important, because corruption is just like spoiling the water. It just makes it dirty. And so we want to have clean deals, but we have to have very clean environments in which investments are being made. And linked to that is the whole issue of G20 effort that we've been talking about on illicit capital flows. Because, come back to it, if you're losing $100 billion, in terms of illicit capital flows, that's money that can go and should go into power, into roads, in ports and rail and stuff like that. So we've got to really tackle that within the framework of the G20 that we're talking about. But I think, just to close on my remarks on those, at the end of the day, as much as we are promoting private sector through G20, we should promote a lot more joint ventures. I would like to see a lot more joint ventures between companies that are coming from G20 countries and those that are in Africa. That's how we are going to make sure that both technology, expertise, finance, and actually the capacity to grow big businesses can really occur together. And we are here as African Development Bank, with World Bank and others, and other African financial institutions to help to provide the de-risking that's going to be necessary to make this work, as the minister from Canada said. So we are here, that's our job, but we want to fast-track things, and I think that's what we're here to do.
Secretary Schmidt, when I mentioned speed, scale, and synergy, you added quality. So how do more African countries demonstrate quality to Germany?
I'm always, to be honest, a bit reluctant to, as a German or European, to tell African countries what they need or should do. This is why this compact with Africa. Obviously, there is expectations, but is a dialogue in partnership where we discuss together what needs to be achieved. And I don't want to bore you, because most of the stuff that is needed has already been said. But I think the people here in the auditorium, they are also the experts. And that is, I think, what is good about the compact. We have the compact teams in the countries. and they are the people you can get to, and they are there to help you overcome all these obstacles that were mentioned, and some of you...
But Secretary Schmidt, would you concur with President Adesina that consistency of policy and eradicating corruption are key tenets that we cannot dispute?
Obviously, I mean, I don't know anybody who would say, yeah, corruption is a good thing, I guess.
We're building to a conclusion in the boardroom here, and I'm just saying that I'm not asking Germany to tell Africa what to do, but I'm saying that you look as a foreign direct investor, you know, you are looking at many emerging markets. So Africa's got to play firmly on that stage, and I think it's very valuable to get Germany's input in terms of what you look for when you deploy Africa. Set aside, when you deploy capital, set aside Africa, but when you look at emerging markets, what do you look for in deploying capital?
So the President mentioned mitigating risks. That's what we do with our guarantee things. So there is a risk. So that is the political environment. We all know it's customs sometimes, as you mentioned it at the beginning, a double taxation agreement, so several obstacles. But I insist, I think that the experts are also here, and we need, that is the good thing about this private sector inclusion or outreach, that we want to hear with the COMPAC teams from them, and to be more specific than just a good governance conference number 110.
Well, the good news is that 48 countries across Africa have tuned into this broadcast, and actually we are giving visibility to what is required from a quality perspective, from a speed, from a scale perspective, and from a synergy perspective to 48 countries across Africa. I mention again, there are only 12 countries in Africa that are part of the compact with Africa. Minister Mboweni, final word to you.
That's a very dangerous thing to do. Nevertheless, I think it's very important that we emphasize once again that this is a compact with Africa. It's not an arrangement where the G20 countries tell Africans what to do. We've been told what to do for a long time. Not what to do, but it's an agreement, an arrangement, basically amongst friends. But private capital not just follows where capital is, it also follows where the growth markets are. Where is the growth? And the markets, the capital will go there. So in short, to sum up, I think we as Africans have to continue organizing ourselves. We have a lot of housekeeping to do, and we know what to do. We should just go ahead and do that. There is a tendency sometimes amongst African countries that when we are confronted with a big problem, we sometimes run away from it and find a way of talking politically about it. Sometimes you have to grab the animal by the scruff of its neck. Something that looks impossible, as Nelson Mandela would have said, suddenly becomes possible. Thank you.
And we need to keep the conversation honest across the board. And I go back to the mantra, transactions, transactions, transactions. And for the G20 compact with Africa, I'm going to close again with Henry Ford. Coming together is a beginning. Staying together is progress. And working together, gentlemen, is success. Thank you very much to our esteemed panelists. I'm now going to ask my esteemed panelists to stand down. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the following people to please come up and join me. Please stay with us. We are... Sorry, all right. We're just going to do a picture. So this is where you would see an ad break if we were a television channel.
Oh.
All right, well, there you have it, of course, that coming out of the Africa Investment
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, if I can ask you to take your seats again, we've still got an additional 2 sessions, and it's incredibly important that we give time to hearing what the countries that are involved with the compact with Africa are actually doing in terms of changing up their policies and what they're implementing as a result of this relationship. So while we are just settling down, I'm going to ask the following people to please come up onto stage. The Honourable Ziad Ladhari, Tunisia. If I can please ask the Honourable Sahar Nasir from Egypt to come up onto the stage. We're also looking for the Honourable Seleshi Bekele for an Ethiopia country update. The Honourable N'Djamena Uzil for a Rwanda country update. And also the Minister for Investment, the Minister in the Morocco country update, Minister Fardas. If you could all please come up, gentlemen, and join me on the stage. Right, the format here is 4 minutes in terms of each panelist is given an opportunity to talk to us about the policy reforms in their country as a direct result of their membership of the Compact with Africa. And if I could please ask the Honourable Ziad Ladhari for his Tunisia country update. Sir, if you could take to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank again the African Development Bank for offering us this great opportunity, and I'm very.
Ask you just to speak a little bit there, a little bit louder.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I said that very happy and honored to be with you today and to discuss the issue of Compact with Africa partnership. And I would like, first of all, to thank the African Development Bank for this great initiative. Actually, I love the remark regarding that is compact with Africa and not compact for Africa. And the idea behind this is that we are talking about partnership. And I personally believe, and I strongly believe, that is one of the most strongest partnership that we should talk about, because the future of the world, I'm convinced, will be, for a major part of it, will be designed in Africa. 1 out of 3 individuals, just few decades, will be African. And we will have almost 3 billion of Africans living in this continent. So caring about the future of Africa is not a matter or an issue for Africans. It's the issue of the world. And we are really very grateful for Angela Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, and his colleagues in the G20 about launching this initiative, because it's very important to see that we are talking about something which is very important not only for Africans but also for our partners. In Tunisia, we believe that this initiative is very important. We were between the early joiners of this initiative and this partnership, and we already did a lot in terms of launching reforms to address the macroeconomic imbalances in the country and about improving the business environment in the country. We just launched a major reform to reduce licenses and authorizations to launch new business in the country. We had actually very good news just a few days ago with the last ranking of doing business, and Tunisia made a major progress, and it's one of the top 5 in Africa and the Arab world. So we are committed as the Tunisian government to work on reforms, and actually we believe that we need more than reforms. We need not only to reform, but to transform actually our economy, our society. And for this reason, we believe also that the young generations is important, and caring about the future of the young generation, caring about the future of the young people we have now in our schools is very important. And for this reason, we think that also the initiative of human capital development is very important, and we need to prepare our human resources to the future, and we need to prepare our young people and to the future and to the 4th industrial revolution and to the digital transformation now in the different sectors. So I would like to emphasize that this partnership is very important. We believe in it, but I think that the platform now of Compact is here. It's up to us to benefit from it and to actually develop it and to create a very large network of people from the business sector, private sector, business community, and political leaders also engaged in that way. Because
Minister, I'm going to jump in here. I do need to apologize to the Honourable Minister Sabeti Sise from Ethiopia. So I apologize. That seat on the stage is yours. So could I please ask him to come up? Minister Sise from Ethiopia, apologies. And you know what I can say is that Ethiopia has received so much positive commentary. So let's give him a round of applause, because we're going to hear from Ethiopia and what is being done right in that territory. Again, my apologies, sir. Let's go straight. Have you caught your breath? Can I catch you at this point? Minister Sise? Can I go straight into Ethiopia? Because we have heard so much about what Ethiopia is doing. So could we take the stage?
Ethiopia is me, Seleshi Aulacho.
Right, and that's why generally I should have photographs. I'm so sorry. So, Minister Sise, my apologies. I had a little bird in my ear earlier telling me that I needed to. So can we go through then with your case study in terms of Ethiopia?
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, sir. Ethiopia. We're taking Ethiopia. Minister Sise, my apologies.
Thank you very much for the question. I think Ethiopia looking itself within Africa, Africa is a rapidly transforming continent. It is a place to do serious business. It has resource potential. It has useful population. It is really rapidly growing. So we have to see it really as a place for making business, and also including its market, over 1 billion people. So when you look to Ethiopia, Ethiopia recently really moving very fast, thanks to our new Prime Minister and the changing of the leadership. And we're moving very fast and making a lot of policy changes and reforms. It's not only on the economic side, but also generally in creating peace in the Eastern Africa region, and inclusiveness. For example, if you take our women participation in the cabinet, 50%, including the new president coming as a female president, and looking also on the democratization issues, many people released from prison, and equal opportunity for all competing parties. This is why I'm talking about this. This is considered as enabling environment and continuity of policy, actually transforming policy towards the better. So when you look at specifically, since this is mainly the energy forum, when you look at the policy change specifically we have done recently, is alongside many sectors like Ethiopian Airlines, railway sector, telecom sector, the energy sector is also considered to be privatized, partially privatized, but also investment which used to be just public sector is in future becoming largely private driven. That means we have created a policy environment and regulatory environment which invites through public-private partnership and independent power producers to do really large-scale and mega-scale projects in renewable energy generation. We made also necessary preparation in terms of enabling environment and creating the necessary preparedness in the reform in the tariff, issues of looking into utilities and institutions to be reformed so that the tariff brings the cost at threshold level that is attractive to the private sector. And also we made necessary preparedness in terms of national electrification program, grid management support program, so that we project what we need in terms of our development. So demands are very significant, growth is very rapid, so we have been witnessing over 10 years a double-digit growth. So it means impacting different sectors, for example, in terms of energy scarcity. So the premise is therefore public sector investment alone is not enough to fill actually the demand in economic area, social area, and environment needs. So we're really moving rapidly, and for that, finance is a critical gap we have. Therefore, we have to fill that through mobilizing, whether it is Africa to Africa investment, like what we witnessed from, for example, Dangote investing in Ethiopia or South Africans investing in Ethiopia, or integrate our region like through power pools or energy interconnection so that resource that is available in one country could be transferred to others and open up more into economic free trade zone and so on and so forth.
Minister Ulachu, Ethiopia, thank you very much, sir, for your input. Minister Cisse, again, I apologize to you, and Cote d'Ivoire is one of the fastest growing economies on the African continent. So, sir, the stage is yours. If you can give us a sense of what Cote d'Ivoire is doing with regards to changing policy as a result of the compact with Africa.
Bien, je voudrais vous remercier, Madame. En principe, nous avions prévu des diapos, mais donc on va faire la présentation sans. Alors, je représente ici le ministre Thierry Fano.
So I do speak on behalf of the Honorable Minister Tiritano, who has actually requested that I do present all of his apologies for being absent. And I also wish to set out that Cote d'Ivoire is a subscriber to the G20 compact, and in this regard we did sign a roadmap with the German authorities. And everything that we do in the area of energy is within the framework of the said roadmap. Our policy, or our energy policies, are defined according to the 4 pillars. The first one pertains to the reliability of power supply. Second is to make sure that there is power for all. The third pillar would be to take into or to mainstream our environmental concerns in our energy policy, and the fourth pillar would be to be a major power generator within the region. So according to such priorities, we did actually define a series of activities or a series of effective implementations in terms of ensuring the viability of our power security and also to ensure a secure supply of fuel, because you do know that we do produce our power using natural gas. And then we've also started working on the regulatory framework
le développement des énergies
in order to
renouvelables.
develop renewables,
Nous
renewable
travaillons
energies, that
également
is,
sur le
and we
processus
also
de
work
passation des marchés,
on the
ce qui est très
process of
important si nous
procurement,
voulons que
which
les
is very
privés
important
viennent nous
because
appuyer dans
private
tout ce que nous faisons. Et
sector
puis,
is
nous
actually
travaillons
supporting us in all of
à
the
rendre
activities we've
opérationnelle
undertaken,
notre
and we
autorité
are
de
also
régulation
working in
que
earnest
nous avons
on
mis en
making
place. Nous
operational
avons une autorité
our authority, a
indépendante de
regulatory
régulation dans le
authority, an
secteur,
independent
et donc nous
authority
travaillons à les
that
rendre
shall
indépendants.
govern
Et enfin, nous
this
travaillons
industry
également sur
independently.
le
And we also
financement
work on
donc,
financing,
de nos actions.
how
Dans
to
ce
finance
cadre-là,
all these
donc,
projects.
nous avons
So in this
défini,
regard, we did define,
je dirais, nous avons
shall say,
donc des opportunités
we do have
en matière d'investissement, donc qui s'élèvent,
investment
je dirais,
opportunities that would
à
total, I say, I apologize, says the speaker, I am looking for the right page.
Nous avons donc travaillé sur
So
les
we
opportunités
did work on opportunities,
d'investissement.
investment
Et
opportunities,
nous avons
that
défini
is,
7
and
grands
we
groupes
have
de projets. Il y a
defined
des projets
7
de
major
production en
project
énergie
groups.
renouvelable
There is actually a
pour
project for
autour de
renewable energy
295 millions de
that would
dollars.
total to
Des projets de
$295
production
million. Another project for
en biomasse, en
for
mini-centrale
power
hydro,
generation using
en hors réseau,
biomass,
donc
mini hydro
alimentation hors réseau,
dams, and
et des
also
projets de transport
for
d'énergie,
water induction
des
and
projets de
supply
distribution, les extensions des réseaux,
energy, this
et
power
puis des projets
distribution
donc,
or
de
grid,
sécurité
as
d'alimentation
well
gaz
as
naturel. L'ensemble de ces
projects pertaining
projets
to securing the supply of
est
natural
évalué
gas.
à
All such
près de
projects would be assessed
2419
at
millions de
some
dollars US.
2
Alors c'est en cela que donc, nous voulons donc, inviter les privés donc, à s'approcher de nous pour jouer leur part dans ce vaste programme. Et nous avons donc dans ce cadre-là travaillé à faire beaucoup de réformes.
Are going to implement a series of reforms consistent with the roadmap that we have signed with the G20. And this will enable Cote d'Ivoire to respect its commitments, international commitments to develop renewable energies, all the while abiding with the commitment to subscribe to during the COP21 in Paris.
Thank you very much for that input from Cote d'Ivoire. So I'm now moving to Egypt. Minister Nasser, if you can take us through the reforms that you are implementing, please.
Thank you very much. I think I will start with that one key reform program is the a sound macroeconomic framework. So we started with a very ambitious and comprehensive economic reform program, fiscal consolidation, monetary policy exploitation of the currency, because we knew that's a prerequisite before we even start discussing private sector-led growth. And that I'd like here to acknowledge our development partners who have supported us throughout the past. I'd like to say that African Development Bank actually took the lead in that, followed by the World Bank and the IMF program. And that helped us put a solid foundation for private sector-led growth. Then a second pillar was improving the business environment, as highlighted in your very first session, a conducive business environment with a new legal and regulatory framework, a new investment law, new companies law, providing all the guarantees and the insurances for the private sector to come in. But in parallel, we also move with a lot of sectoral reforms that encourage the private sector's participation. And here I would like to highlight specifically the energy sector. And my colleague, His Excellency Minister Dr. Shekhar, is sitting there, and he has been given as an exemplary sector in renewable energy, bringing in the private sector, having the largest solar plant in Aswan, Bimban. So it's a very good example of a partnership between the government and the private sector. And here I would like to highlight the partnership with Germany. I was also there in the Compact Africa with the Council Merkel and heads of state, including my President Sisi. And the Germans have provided excellent support, bringing in investment. But more important than the investment and the energy sector is the vocational training and the capacity building that came along with the investment and along with the concessional loans. And that is exactly what we need to address in Africa. You have continent with a young population, and hence the vocational training and the training of engineers, technicians, and the blue collar is critical, and that would be the only way to achieve sustainable and inclusive growth. And I want to highlight one issue that was brought up in the discussion back in Berlin is infrastructure. So macro business, sound business environment, but also the infrastructure, because you need connectivity roads, you need railways, you need the maritime, you need ports to encourage the private sector to come in, but also to be export-oriented and to go and make use of the free trade agreements within Africa, but also the free trade agreements between African countries and Europe and the States and Asia. And that is one also program that we're proceeding with, and we are already reaping results. I want to highlight here a few things that we have united, all of us here on the panel, but also African countries at the caucus. So we were able to lobby with international financial institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, but also our partners such as EBRD and European Investment Bank and the EU to make sure we are able to do the more regional integration among the African countries and to proceed with a lot of infrastructure projects that would help us achieve and lobby for the African agenda, to put the African agenda on the agenda of various IFIs and Arab funds. We are very proud that Egypt will be chairing the African Union as of January 2019, and we are already discussing with all stakeholders at the government levels, but also with the private sector, to make sure we're able to boost and push new reforms to ensure the deepening of economic partnership, both at the commercial and investment. And we put SMEs and young entrepreneurs and women, especially that this panel, finally, you have one woman in addition to your good self. So women's empowerment, the presidency has announced last year as the Women's Year, and that is giving us a lot of leverage and empowerment to also be part of the decision-making process and to also be part of active role in the Compact Africa. Thank you.
Ms. Nasir, thank you very much. Minister Uzila, I hope I don't show any favoritism when I say that we're talking now about remarkable Rwanda, and adding on what Minister Nasir was saying about women being put at the center of policy development. That's certainly one of the tenets of Rwanda. If you can give us an update, sir.
Thank you. As explained earlier in the previous panel, G20 Compact with Africa is about, for African countries, members of Compact with Africa, conducting policy reforms aiming at improving the investment environment to attract foreign investment, and for G20 countries to facilitate companies, large and small and medium, to invest in the Compact with Africa countries. So in that framework, Rwanda has maintained its macroeconomic stability with well-managed debt levels. Over the last 16 years, our growth was around 8%, and our inflation rate maintained below 5%. Rwanda is rated B+ with stable outlook by Fitch, and B with positive outlook by S&P. Rwanda has improved its investment code with a package of fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. This year, the Doing Business report of the World Bank ranked Rwanda as number 29 globally and second in Africa, improving from the position of 41 last year. And you remember the Compact with Africa started last year. So over 1 year, Rwandan ranking improved from 41 to 29. It was also important to note that among the top 4 reformers in Africa, 3 are Compact members. These are Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, and Rwanda. And Rwanda has implemented the largest number of reforms recently, including registering land and other properties, property transfers, enforcing contracts, and accessing credits. We have implemented also a global visa regime. So everyone from any country can come to Rwanda and get visa at our borders. So, and in the framework of Compact with Africa, in June this year, we launched our first car manufacturing in Rwanda by Volkswagen from Germany. And this was a collaboration with several players, including the Minister of Cooperation of Germany, GIZ, and other players to make this investment possible. And this investment is going to attract other investment in the value chain, including Siemens. So coming back to gender equality, of course, I want to also to support my colleague from Egypt. Rwanda has, since 2003, has adopted a constitution guaranteeing minimum 30% of women in all decision-making positions. And in our parliament, women represent over 62%, in government, 50%. And this goes up to local government levels. So in short, the G20 Compact with Africa is a good initiative. It has lasted only 1 year plus. Last week, we were in Germany, where every country, every compact country has at least one project with German companies. I think this needs to be scaled up and include more investors from all the G20 countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Feroz, Morocco, can you enter the fray?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yesterday, I was talking to a Moroccan youngster. I told him, you know, Morocco has progressed 9 ranks in the Doing Business report. And his answer was remarkable. He just asked me, have you ever tried to eat a Doing Business report? And I guess what he tried to say is, we must not fetishize the reforms, but we must keep our eyes on the ball, and the ball is job creation. So how do we do that in Morocco? We just tend to treat investors as clients. So every businessman knows he has to know his clients' needs before answering them. And I think investors come to Morocco because, not because we are leaders in cost competitiveness or logistics or things like that. I think they come to Morocco because of the quality of the public-private partnership. And what I mean by that is often decision makers, they put on very macro strategies and visions, and they close deals at the micro level, like an investment convention, but they forget to close the middle, the meso level of contracts and sending signals to the private sector. So in order to understand foreign investors, you have to understand private sector national investor first. And then you send signals saying, okay, in this sector, I need that amount of people trained, I need that amount of job created, I need that amount of local integration rates, I need that amount of local SMEs working with you guys who come from in free tax zones or come from the outside. And when I hear people say, well, investors go to Morocco because Morocco is a stable country. I don't like the word stable, because stable means that it implies that you pretend you never fall. I prefer resilient. Resilient implies that you can fall, but you stand up again. And that's exactly what we try to do in Morocco. First, resilience, political resilience, of course, because of the democratic transition. Second, resilience because of security. Because before investing in a country, you have to send people who train the locals, so you care about your own physical security. Second, there are resilience at the economic level and policy making. So, for example, in April of this year, we passed corporate insolvency reform, which was very important to secure the long-term prospects of investors in Morocco. We also passed subsidy reform, which helps state allow resources and capital to where it is needed. And also we've implemented a flexibilization of the exchange rate of the Moroccan dirham. So all this gives long-term signals to the investors who can work well in Morocco. And then we are about to put a very important piece of legislation in Parliament, which is the investment code. So this investment code has been, let's say, crowdsourced with the private sector in Morocco. So let's say that there's the hardware, the Moroccan agencies who try to help the investor, and we try to make it a short circuit between the public servant who has the power to sign and the investor. The circuit has to be the shorter possible, not having to sign things in Rabat in the capital, but sign things in the regions, give authorizations in the regions. That's for the hardware. And then for the software part, we have this investment code that will come, and I think it will be very interesting for SMEs and startups and entrepreneurship, digital economy, and industry. I'd like to add a last thing. I compared investors with clients. Clients are sensitive with time to market. Investors, when they come, they need to know that they can set up a plant in 1 year, not 1.5, not 2 years, 1 year. You have to bring about speed in your public policies, and I thank you for your attention.
So a panel of ministers demonstrating tangible results across Africa. We're back in the Africa boardroom. Thank you very much to Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, and Rwanda. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't go anywhere. There's another session with Yana Kekar, who is the Global Managing Partner at Dalberg. So please, a round of applause for our esteemed ministers and for the tangible results.
All right, everyone, please take your seats. We are ready now to discuss how the compact has translated into concrete investment in just 1 year. If you will join me in please taking your seats, we will start momentarily, and allow me to invite to the stage the participants in our first discussion, which is Egypt, and specifically the Egypt Refinery Company. So Minister Sahar Nasser, please join me. In addition to Dr. Nasser, Mr. Ju Hong Lee, Dr. Ahmed Heikel, and Mr. Tim Turner. If my kind panelists can take their seats, I'll provide a brief introduction and we can start. All right. Dr. Nasser, if I can lure you away to join us. All right, everyone, thank you so much. We're ready to begin. All right. Ooh. Hello? There we go. Shall we? Thank you so much. So, it is with great pleasure that I launch into this discussion. My name is Jana Kakar, and I'm the Global Managing Partner of Dalberg. And Dalberg basically eats and breathes investment and enabling investments across Africa. And so my great pleasure is to be a part of a discussion about one of the landmark investments that the Compact has helped realize. I've been asked by organizers to help us catch up on time, so we'll spend 30 minutes discussing a concrete case study from Egypt, and then shift and do so looking at Togo. So, with your permission, I will briefly introduce my esteemed panelists, and then say a few words about the Egypt Refinery Company before turning it over to them to hear about how this all came about. So first, it is my great pleasure to be joined again by Dr. Sahar Nasser, who of course is not a strange face to anyone who is here in the last panel. Dr. Nasser is the Egyptian Minister of Investment and International Cooperation. Directly to my left is Dr. Ahmed Haikel, who I think has the best introduction I ever received to anyone, which was the magician behind this wonderful investment. He is the founder of Kala Holdings, one of the majority shareholders of Egypt Refinery Company and leading investor across the sector. Mr. Tim Turner, thank you so much for being with us, Group Chief Risk Officer at the African Development Bank. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Juhung Lee, the Director of Plant Finance Department at the Export-Import Bank of Korea. And Kexim was the single largest lender that helped make the Egyptian refining company come to fruition. So I'll say just a couple of words of context before asking some questions of my panelists. So for those of you that are not familiar, refined petroleum is one of the top imports, of course, in Egypt. Something on the order of nearly $4 billion a year, and this is set to increase. The demand is increasing quite rapidly, something of an estimated 1 million to 1.2 million barrels per day over the last 3 years. Along comes the Compact and was able to unlock or unleash the potential for an investment to create the Egyptian Refining Company, the first majority private oil refinery in Egypt. And this, of course, is a tremendous investment, not just in size, by virtue of being roughly $4 billion, one of Africa's largest ever project finance deals, but also for its potential for import substitution and job creation. So that is just to give you a bit of a flavor, and now I will turn it to the voices that are most important to be heard so that we can learn how they made this all come about. So perhaps let me start, Dr. Nasser, tell us a little bit about the advent, I suppose, of this wonderful investment and how Egypt took the opportunity offered by the Compact to work with these partners and make it come true.
Thank you very much for having me on this panel, and I think this panel makes my life much easier because as a Minister of Investment and International Cooperation, it's with pride that I see these large investments coming in, because at the end of the day, my role is to improve the business environment, make sure the environment is conducive, make sure that we're providing enough assurances and guarantees for the private sector to come in, and to also put Egypt on the global investment map, would put an edge and encourage investments to come in, and encourage also international financial institutions and investment banks to support and to finance these big investments. So that is my main role, and that is the main objective of the ambitious economic reform program. So even when I make reference to fiscal consolidation, I refer to the monetary reforms. What I am really here, these are different tools to just make sure that the macroeconomic framework is also sound for the private sector to come in. So that's basically what I really want to highlight in terms. And I had several meetings with Mr. Hakel where we also discussed challenges, because it is very important when I talk about a conducive business environment, a solid investment law, a companies law, a capital markets law. My role is also to ensure I iron out any wrinkles, address any challenges, I cut red tape, remove the bureaucracy. Not just at the kickoff stage and the announcement of the investment deal, but more important as the investment evolves and starts rolling out on the ground. And that is very important, that you maintain this, leave space for the private sector to play its role, less interference from the government. Our role is more streamlining, cutting red tape, encouraging the private sector to come in, because they will be the main source of access to foreign currency. They will be the job creators. They will be the only sector that would help us achieve sustainable and inclusive growth.
Well, this is something we often hear President Adesina say: public sector enabled, private sector led economic growth. So speaking of the private sector, let me turn to you. Dr. Hakel, you're the founder of Kala Holdings, and as I understand it, quite instrumental to what has come to be through the ERC. Tell us a bit about the journey, and I believe you also have a video to share with us, which will be great.
Can we?
Yes, shall I ask?
Yeah, can we put the video first?
Yes, let's start with the short video. It's a few minutes, but I understand quite fascinating.
Something big is happening in Egypt. The Egyptian Refining Company is the Egyptian private sector's largest in-progress infrastructure mega project.
The main idea of ERC is to get low-value products that are being produced in Cork, Cairo Oil Refinery Company, and producing high-value distillates that the market currently needs. The project will be producing 4.75 million tons of products. This project will cut imports of Egyptian petroleum products by 40%.
ERC is one of Africa's largest ever project finance deals. The landmark investment attracted the support of top Egyptian, Gulf, and international investors, global export credit agencies, and development finance institutions.
The project has been 12 years in the making. In 2008, I almost finalized a debt package from commercial banks. Unfortunately, the global financial crisis had a very bad impact on the banks who were providing the debt, and they had to pull out. So we had to start anew.
The debt package finalized in 2010 included $2.35 billion in senior debt and $225 million of subordinated debt for a total of $2.6 billion.
On the equity side, we started the project with a group of high net worth investors from the Gulf, and we were successful in concluding a number of commitments from local institutions. However, as a result of the Egyptian revolution in 2011, many of those local institutions had to pull out, and we had an equity shortfall of around $450 million. Qala Holding had to step in big time and took a part of the shortage, and we secured $360 million from Gulf investors who were able to step up to the plate.
Qala and its partners reached financial close on ERC in June 2012, on the eve of Egypt's first presidential election. And its contractors GS and Mitsui broke ground in 2014. Since then, ERC has weathered an oil price crash, Egypt's forex crisis, and rampant inflation.
The reason why it survived is the economics were rock solid, and we had a very deep organization both within Qala and within ERC.
ERC applied the concept of responsible investing advocated by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
The project has been a good source of employment in general in Egypt. At peak, we were employing 18,000 people, of which 1,800 from the local communities. There is also a great environmental impact. We take out of the environment 96,000 tons of sulfur every year and 450,000 tons of coke that are being produced and disposed of safely instead of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere.
ERC conducted the most comprehensive environmental social impact assessment ever commissioned in Egypt for an industrial project. The result of which ERC has been focusing on 4 main areas to develop the social community. The project is expected to be in full commercial operation by end of April 2019.
We are very grateful that our backers, our fund debt providers, the equity shareholders have allowed us this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. ERC is a great example of the role of the private sector. Given time, resource, support from the government, the private sector can lead a lot of projects and can be one of the engines of growing this economy into the future.
Okay, we are now officially inspired, but you have to tell us how you made it happen.
Tough journey. 12, 13 years in the making. We found the right idea, which allowed the economics to be strong. And we got very strong support from the Egyptian government throughout. And I remember even two years back, there were glitches that we needed to surpass, and the Egyptian government stood by us in a very, very big way. So DFIs, developmental financial institutions, ECAs, have been phenomenal in their support, in the support of this project. You cannot have a project of this size without the developmental financial institutions and in the ECAs. I can't say enough about the support that we got from Korean Exim Bank, from JBIC, from NEXI, from the African Development Bank, and from the European Investment Bank. They have been fantastic, and sometimes we all criticize, we say they are slow, etc., but without them, this project could not have happened. And I see Mr. Lee fairly often these days, so it's always, I was in Korea a month ago, and we'll see each other in London next week. But, Tim has been phenomenal. Tim was leading the private sector's group within the African Development Bank, and I remember at a variety of junctures during this project, I would call him in ungodly hours, and I say, Tim, we have this problem, and the support that we got from the African Development Bank is really phenomenal. You cannot have a project of this size without backers that are sizable and understanding, because there are ups and downs, and you have to understand that it's not easy, especially during the period that this project has been done in. We survived a global financial crisis in 2008. We survived the first Egyptian upheaval in 2011. We survived a very tough period of time during the Muslim Brotherhood, and we got phenomenal support starting 2013. So everybody stepped up to the plate. People can say I am the magician. No, I'm not. But I have phenomenal partners who have supported us throughout the period.
Well, that is the way that the best way to pass the baton to you, Mr. Lee. Tell us a bit about Korea Exim Bank's participation here. When you knew that this combination of the idea, the concept, the context of the compact was coming together to create a unique investment opportunity.
Sure. I really do thank you, and it's really my honor to be invited to this forum. I think it is due to a special, very friendly relationship. One of the staff in AFDB, Monterey, I don't know whether you're hearing to my speech now, but and myself with respect to this ERC project. Probably you have not heard of the Export-Import Bank of Korea before, so I need to introduce a little bit of interest to the institution where I work. The Export-Import Bank of Korea is an official export credit agency of the Republic of Korea. We provide finance to a number of projects in order to promote Korean exports, overseas investment, and above all, to build up the relationship with other countries. Besides this export credit, we also manage two government funds, namely Economic Development Cooperation Funds and Inter-Korea Cooperation Fund, both of which are ODA in nature. So in such a vein, we decided to provide up to $800 million to the ERC project, and we're very proud to be the single largest lender to the project. We have thought about the weakness and strongness of this project when we began discussion of this project 10 years ago, but we really didn't have much experience with African countries back then. And sometimes, especially with respect to limited recourse financing, like project finance, and sometimes, security package and, risk mitigation measures are sometimes weak and from the lender's perspective. But in order to overcome those difficulties, Egyptian government have provided quite a lot of, support to the project, and, they have explained why this is really an important project for the economy of Egypt and the people living in the country of Egypt. So that is really the single most important thing that we have taken into consideration when we have decided to provide up to $800 million to the project. And second, we saw the existence of a AFDB. I mean, it is really important factor to take into consideration that MDB or DFI are, on the same page with us, that bringing in AFDB as one of the senior lender among syndicate banks, and as well as subordinate lender, provide a lot of comfort to the lenders. And at that period of time, obviously, everybody have thought the political stability and institutional effectiveness of Egypt has been, being improved day by day. And now there have been some turbulence in a number of years ago, but now we see that this has been stabilized. So we have confidence that someday it's going to happen very soon. We're going to see the completeness of the project very soon, and we're very sure that this is going to help us to strengthen the relationship between Egypt and Korea. This is really the background of why we have decided to invest quite a lot of money to this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Turner, the AFDB's role, it sounds that there was an element, of course, as a senior lender, but also beyond that, connective tissue in a range of ways. Tell us a bit about that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Yana. And as Ahmed has said, at the time I was wearing a different hat. Today I'm the Chief Risk Officer of the African Development Bank. At the time I was the head of the bank's private sector team that led this transaction within the bank. And this morning I had a chance to consult my notes from the board meeting that took place quite some years ago. And it's rare to be able to say what we projected was going to happen has in fact happened. And for the African Development Bank, we look at our investments through basically 4 different lenses. In the case of the ERC, I mean, we hit the bullseye on all 4 of those lenses. And I'm looking back now and say, we were dead on. And it's become a real flagship operation for the African Development Bank. We were involved as a senior financer for $200 million, which would be one of the largest, and at the time was the largest ticket we had ever done as a private sector. An additional $25 million of subordinated convertible debt. In addition, we were part of the equity structure through the Citadel Fund, which is part of one of the shareholders in the deal. The African Development Bank, as I said, has 4 lenses. And when I went to the board, we talked about all 4 of those lenses. The first one being a strategic alignment. We could see incredibly strong alignment between this project, the priorities of the Egyptian government, and the private sector development priorities of the African Development Bank. So it was bullseye on that one. Second one, of course, as a bank, commercial viability. We're not in a charity business. We are bankers. And the economics of this project were glaringly strong. Because it's effectively import substitution, we could see that adding this part of the value chain in the local economy was going to have massive development effects, which I'll talk about in a second, but commercially would make the underlying commercial aspects of this thing very, very strong. I want to say there's no project that is bulletproof. But under the widest range of, plausible scenarios, we could see that this was a project that would very comfortably service its debt and reward its shareholders very well. The third lens that we look at things through is really the development lens, and that's the big benefit the African Development Bank is buying when it's investing. And we could see tremendous opportunities here. And I think that in the video we saw not only on the employment side, but the savings in foreign exchange, the savings for the government in the order of $300 million a year. When we did the economic modeling of this project, we estimated that there was a economic net present value of roughly $1 billion, of which 70%, more than 70% would accrue in the local economy. For us, that was a sharing between the stakeholders that was very, very powerful argument. There's also the whole environmental story that I think comes out in the video, how the addition of this component in the value chain actually reduces overall sulfur gas emissions. I think almost a third of what the whole country was emitting has been reduced. These were all very compelling arguments. And then the last lens we look at is through this additionality lens. We need to demonstrate that we are not crowding out the private sector, rather we're crowding them in. And as has been said earlier, the timing of this project fell between 2 very important milestones. We had the global financial crisis just before it, and of course then the Arab Spring right after it. And the African Development Bank, for us to be able to come in at a key point there, providing long-term financing, which was able to catalyze some shorter-term commercial financing, that was really dead center, bullseye for us in terms of the additionality, complementarity story. As I said earlier, this has become a flagship operation, and we'd like to do more. Yeah.
That's wonderful. You heard it here first. He wants to do more. So with the last moment or two, what I'd actually like to go is back to the heart, really, of the story that Egypt is here telling. And there are people in our audience today on both the public and private sector side of compact countries. Share with them, if you will, in just a sentence or two, what bit of advice would you give, both you, Dr. Nasser, as your vantage point as a minister from the public sector, if you were to say, I would say one lesson learned is X. And then I'll come to you, Dr. Heikel, from the corporate leader perspective. a bit of tangible advice for others out there that, like Egypt, might be interested in this kind of blended finance investment and making it a reality as you have?
I will pick on the point that Turner has mentioned, the flagship report. And the successful flagship report is one where you have a comprehensive integrated development package. And here maybe I can refer specifically to the African Development Bank, but also with our bilaterals from Korea. This was a package where the public sector arm from the African Development Bank has supported policy reforms that allowed for more private sector participation in such a strategic sector that where very limited private sector was involved, but also using the private sector arm to provide the equity financing and the financial support to the private sector. And that's very important, especially when we're looking at the macroeconomic framework, the total public debt, and hence we want to rely more on the private sector to come in and to have projects that would bring more value added, especially that Egypt is currently endowed with a lot of, in general, oil, gas production. So moving from this to a sector that is more of value added into the production process of a refinery is something what we really appreciate and we encourage. And the whole investment law is resonating around providing the guarantees and assurances for the private sector to feel they can move on. And that is why, as Dr. Hakel has mentioned, they were able to weather a lot of crises and mishaps that happened. And the current laws provides even more assurances for Dr. Hakel to even evolve and have a more successful and larger operation.
Thank you so much, Minister. I think that's terrific advice. It's the combination of flexible and responsive capital and targeting the value add. Dr. Hakel, from the private perspective.
We are one of the groups that are extremely bullish on Egypt, and we have investments in every sector. We have 8 big companies under Qal'a Holdings. We're the largest private sector distributor of natural gas also. We are the largest private sector distributor of power. We are distributor of petroleum products. We have a variety of economic interests in the country. But we are extremely bullish, and I say that Egypt has one very important quality to it. Even if there are infringements, Egypt and the government of Egypt have always find a way to do the right things at every juncture. So even if you have somebody in the bureaucracy that does something that is not the right thing, if at the end of the day you continue following the right path of making sure that you ask for what your rights are, at the end you'll get them. And I have many, many, many examples of things that, yes, the grievances should not exist in the first place, but at the end, the Egyptian government does the right thing. And this is why we are extremely bullish. There are certain countries, now that I've been 25 years doing business in Africa, there are a number of countries that I will do business in blindly. There are 3 or 4 that I will do business cautiously, and there are at least 10 that I will not touch. And Egypt is in the first category. So
wonderful. Wonderful. Please, everyone, join me in congratulating our panelists on the ERC and thanking them for sharing their wisdom with us. All right, then with no further ado, let me invite my Togo panelists up, and we will seamlessly segue into the Togo portion and a focus in on Togo investment case study. All right, everyone, let me now invite to the stage our panelists to discuss Togo Box, an extraordinary investment like the ERC. Shegun Bakari, advisor to the President of the Republic of Togo. Thomas Cheviot, Vice President, Strategy of Finance at Togo Box. Ousseynou Nakulima, Director of Renewables and Energy Efficiency at the African Development Bank. And Koen Doens, the Deputy Director General for the International Cooperation and Development at the European Commission. Thank you all, gentlemen, for joining me. Wonderful. So earlier I was listening to the country compact discussions and was struck very much by the mention of the fourth industrial revolution, the recurring theme of digitization and automation. And I was very keen to be the one that gets to introduce you, if you're not already familiar, to Togo Box, which I think is an investment that fits squarely into more of the kind we'll see in the future. So again, as I did with Egypt, I'll just provide a sentence or two of context. You know, Togo's rural electrification a couple of years ago was maybe 5%, when Ghana and Nigeria, adjacent countries, were in the 40-some%. Pay-as-you-go solar systems are a remarkable way of filling that gap, because it's quite an innovative way of addressing some of the bottlenecks and the challenges around currency risk, lack of familiarity with the technology, project finance opportunities, all the traditional challenges and bottlenecks that we know. And in this instance, quite an innovative investment was structured, and I will say no more so that my panelists can tell you all about it, to enable solar and to enable Togo Box to come to fruition. And so with no more further ado, let me turn to you perhaps first. Mr. Bakari, and as I said, Mr. Bakari advises the President of Togo. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the advent of this opportunity and how it developed.
Thank you very much. I will speak in French.
S'il vous plaît, oui, ça serait un plaisir.
We are at the end of the day, so.
No.
Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation et merci à la Banque africaine de développement pour ce forum très intéressant. Nous, au Togo, tout est parti de ce que vous avez dit, c'est-à-dire qu'on s'est rendu compte à un moment donné, comme le disait tout à l'heure le représentant du Maroc, une fois qu'on parle de grands projets, une fois qu'on parle de croissance économique, à la fin de la journée, la population nous dit, nous, on continue de vivre dans la pauvreté. Pas la croissance, on ne mange pas les grandes centrales, et le Togo étant petit pays, certes, mais si demain on mettait 1000 mégawatts au Togo, il resterait encore 50% des Togolais qui n'auraient pas accès à l'électricité. Donc, fin 2017, le président de la République a souhaité qu'on change complètement de paradigme et qu'on se dise, finalement, quelle est la bonne solution pour apporter l'électricité à chaque Togolais. Ce ne sera pas 100% de grid extension, ce ne sera pas 100% de solar home system, ce ne sera pas 100% de mini-grid. Donc c'est une combinaison de tout ça qui permettra de délivrer la bonne technologie pour chacun des Togolais et chacune des Togolaises. Et on est parti de zéro, parce qu'en fait, il n'y avait pas de marché de solar home system au Togo. Donc on a essayé de construire les incentives qui permettraient d'attirer des entreprises pour qu'elles viennent investir. Parce qu'on a la conviction que l'État seul ne peut pas tout faire. Et c'est aussi le sens du G20 Compact with Africa. Nous avons fait un certain nombre de réformes qui ont commencé à porter leurs fruits. Comme vous le savez, le Togo est aujourd'hui un des top 10 reformers au monde. Dans le dernier classement Doing Business, nous en sommes contents et nous allons continuer à travailler dans ce sens. Nous avons mis en place un environnement favorable à l'investissement d'entreprises comme Box, notamment en les aidant à avoir des facilités en termes de
with facilities in terms of transportation, with the Togolese state company, providing them with tax breaks and incentives so as to provide affordable pricing for the population and supporting them in terms of financing, because we were able to get the first from-scratch financing for an Indesco company on a brand new market. We did everything, and today we're very happy to see that this is a new system that has taken hold in Togo and that is growing, and we really wish to thank the AFDB for its support as it believed in this project from the beginning, as well as the EU and other partners. The question for us, once we've completed building this framework and putting on foot this strategy, we need to see how are we to bridge the gap between the prices practiced by a private company in order to deliver power and the price that the poorer segments of the population will be capable to pay. And I am pleased to announce that in the coming days, Togo will be probably the first country in Africa to implement a subsidy mechanism. This is what we will call the digital solar account that would allow every household that uses individual solar kits to receive a grant from the state so as to be able to get clean, quality electricity and also reduce and mitigate a number of risks that would be health-related or safety-related.
Magnifique. Merci beaucoup.
This is magnificent.
Alors,
thank you so
now
very
I will
much.
turn Mr. Dunes. Tell us a little bit about how the European Commission identified sort of the opportunity and how you came, obviously, to be a part of the journey of Togo Box.
Well, thanks a lot, and let me start by congratulating, of course, Togo for its outstanding performance on the Doing Business Index. I think with, you're the leader. You jumped 17 stages ahead, and I think that's the best performance. And it's an important start, because I think that when we talk about investment, we all know that investment climate and the efforts that countries need to do are the starting point. I think it is an essential reference point for the G20 compacts. Now, we all know that making efforts, making reforms means making an effort. Making an effort has a cost, and that cost can only be made if there is also a benefit on the opposite side. We have been very strongly engaging with Togo, like with a number of other countries, to try and make sure that we can accompany them on all the efforts they do, through budget support, through technical assistance. And one of the key points which we are strong at as a European Union is, of course, renewable energy. It's one of our top priorities across the African continent, and therefore it's one of the things we are doing in Togo as well. Not only bbox, I think we have to see it in a broader picture. We are working as well with a number of banks on extending the distribution network of Grand Lomé. We are investing in hydroelectric power, but then, as you said, one of the key points, of course, is that everything needs to trickle down also to the broader population. And from that point of view, DESCO and the bbox project was basically a perfect gift for us, because it is the kind of thing we want to do, and it is the kind of project for which we are equipped. We have developed, as part of the external investment plan, a new tool which we did not have, a guarantee, which we can now use, and that's what we have used to support DESCO and bbox, to make precisely those projects possible. We basically help them cover the risk, and because of that risk coverage which we provide, projects like these can happen. For us, it is part of a broader package, as I've just explained, but that's why this is an outstanding example of the kind of things we want to do in the energy sector with the guarantee.
And did I hear you correctly that this is a new form of financing guarantee that was inspired by, created for bbox?
Well, no, the guarantee is something we have developed under the external investment plan, which we are strengthening now, and which we hope to strengthen even more under our next multi-annual budget. So the guarantee is there. What we are doing is now identifying with partners and with banks precisely those projects on which we can mobilize the guarantee. And this is an outstanding example of one of the things.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, I heard renewable energy, so how could I not think of the director of renewable energies here at the African Development Bank? Tell us just a little bit, Mr. Nakulima, of the AFDB's role in this journey of BBOX.
Thank you, Yana. I think I would like to first underline and really emphasize the leadership that really led to this, which is the leadership of Togo. The government of Togo has seen very clearly the opportunity that the falling price of solar, for instance, solar panels prices have been divided by 10 in the last 10 years, as really a mean to speed up the electrification. And they saw also the need to include the off-grid electricity as one key pillar of the electrification strategy. And actually, this is very much in line with the thinking at the bank. And that's how I want to answer your question. If you look at our ambition at the African Development Bank, it's to achieve universal access by 2025. And actually, the difficult equation we need to solve, and I think Togo is a case in point, and this transaction is a case in point in solving this equation, is that on one hand, we say to achieve universal access, we need to provide to 75 million households access to electricity through off-grid solutions. And the International Energy Agency is saying more or less the same, saying that we must think about future access going at least 50% through off-grid solutions. So this is one side of the equation. On the other side of the equation, well, you have the issue of the financial structures, the financial instruments that can help achieve that universal access. So that's really the problem we needed to solve. And the way we approached it was to first make a first case study. And we did a transaction like that in Ivory Coast. And I must commend our risk team because this was a very innovative and first type of transaction. The bank is used to doing large-scale project finance, while here we wanted to provide a commercial solution to population who are in rural areas and whose purchasing power was very, very low. So the risk team looked at innovative structures, which is basically receivable-based financing. But this was a one-off, and they made it very clear that to scale it up and to roll it out in many countries, we need two things. One is have local currency financing, and secondly, just as our colleague from the European Union said, we need another institution to take a slice of the risk so that our risk capital could be preserved. And that's how we came up with a proposal to the European Commission through the External Investment Plan to actually provide us with the coverage to take this slice of risk capital that can allow us as African Development Bank to provide financing through local commercial banks who can provide this local currency. So Togo will be the first country to benefit through this project of BBOX, but we have in our pipeline worth about $300 million of transactions, and it's thanks to the $50 million of risk coverage that we are receiving from the External Investment Plan.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nakulima. I think what you just shared, it wasn't just a reflection on Togo BBOX, but actually a very helpful, tangible, here's how we did it and how we used our capital and what we had to bring to bear to support the European Commission, something highly replicable. That's a very useful lesson. So now over to Monsieur Cheviot. You are now one of the leaders at the helm of the Togo BBOX that the institutions to your left and right have created alongside yourself. As VP of Strategy and Finance, tell us a bit about your experience to date and perhaps where you see BBOX going.
Sure. Thank you very much first to AFDB for the very interesting conference. First, I'd like to salute actually for sure the vision of the presidency of Togo, which we thought was very innovative and very groundbreaking in many ways. So going back to where we were a few years ago, we started in East Africa. Our two main markets at the beginning of 2017 were Kenya and Rwanda. We had at the time close to 60,000 customers, and we were always very interested with West Africa. We didn't really know exactly how to go into this new region for us. We thought there were some issues, some barriers that we had to overcome. And when we actually received the request for proposal from the government of Togo, we thought that was extremely exciting, very well prepared. And I'd like to actually salute also the work of the African Development Bank to support actually this kind of project. And we clearly saw that as the first PPP in the sector. There were 11 participants. We actually won the request for proposal. And we thought that actually that was probably the best way to enter this Western African market. Why? Because, as Mr. Bakari explained, there was a lot of visibility for a company such as bbox in terms of tax incentives, in terms of local financing, in terms of partnerships with local stakeholders, one of them being La Poste, which actually helped us really roll out our deployment and expansion plan all across the different rural areas in Togo, the telco operators, etc. And in just a space, I think in just a space of 1 week, we actually managed to get all the meetings we requested and actually agree on really the main points with the different stakeholders. All of that because of the efficiency, I have to say, of the presidency of Togo. So that was actually how we decided to enter this new market. We see tremendous opportunity in actually delivering our technological solution to the rural households in Togo. And we want more than that. So we thought that most of those customers are farmers. They don't have really a salary. They have income, not a very stable income. So one, we are actually providing a pay-as-you-go solution, which is the first of a kind in Togo. So we actually, I think, in a way, incentivizing the telco operators to move actually deeper into those rural areas where you don't have any service. We are the first service for those unfavored populations. We want to actually increase the service because bbox is a very, very data-driven technology company with a very highly oriented service in the off-grid space. And I think that the idea is that tomorrow we'll actually be delivering new services other than just energy. It could be clean cooking, for instance, which we think is very interesting. It could be internet. It could be microfinancing. We see tremendous opportunities in all those areas. The second thing I'd like to mention is in order to actually deliver what we committed to do with the government of Togo, we are a small company. Yes, we got actually local financing, but we thought that actually by partnering with a large, world-class utility such as EDF, we could actually expand and deliver in a faster way the objectives that were set up for this specific project.
They say that the path to love never runs smoothly, and I think the same can always be said of any investment, particularly blended finance investments that involve public and private sector working in complex contexts over a long time. So I'd love to ask you all, actually, to opine on the question I posed at the end of the last panel, which is what practical advice would you give? What 1 or 2 sentences of advice to others in the audience that are hoping, in all likelihood, to be instigators of investments like bbox? As you've lived the experience, what have you learned? What piece of advice would you give? And maybe I'll start here with you, Koen and Shegun and Thomas, and then give the last word to Ousseynou. So Mr. Dunes.
First, the advice is very easy. We have a guarantee and we want to use it. We have a guarantee and we want to use it. So the key point for us is, and I think Togo has given the perfect example, identify a good project. Identify a good financial partner. Come to us and we can help.
Parfait. Et à vous maintenant, monsieur.
Moi, je pense que le point le plus important, c'est la vision stratégique, en fait, la vision politique. Quand on parle d'électrification ou d'accès à l'électricité, c'est d'abord et avant tout une question de vision politique, en fait, de choix politique. Le choix de dire qu'on ne veut pas seulement attendre ou demander aux populations d'attendre l'extension du réseau, et le choix de dire qu'on veut leur offrir dès à présent l'accès à l'électricité parce que ce n'est plus un luxe, c'est devenu un besoin, une nécessité en fait. Si, comme a l'habitude de le dire le président de la République du Togo, il ne s'agit pas d'électricité, il s'agit de décentraliser la prospérité. Et si nous faisons des taux de croissance qui sont importants dans nos pays et que la croissance ne touche pas le dernier de nos concitoyens, ça ne marchera pas. Donc, vision stratégique, choix clair, et je pense qu'il y a des instruments de financement au niveau des différentes institutions.
Oui, fantastique. Il n'y a pas de substitut. Alors, à vous.
Sure. So I think from bbox perspective, three things. First, the reason why we are succeeding in Africa is because of technology. Without the technology, you can't actually deliver, to this extent in rural areas. We think we have one of the best technologies, and we want to actually invest more and deliver more services to those populations. Number two, financing. I think financing is key. Togo we had the chance of having quickly local financing. It's probably a bit easier in some cases because of the CFA being pegged to the euro. If you look at Eastern Africa, it's sometimes a bit more challenging. We are actually working with some of the investors in this panel to actually deliver innovative financing solutions in one of our countries in Eastern Africa. And yes, having this guarantee from EIB is very important, and having actually the financing from AFDB as well. The third thing is operating model. Without a good operating model, you can't scale up. We've seen actually many companies in the past who started with great ideas, but if you don't have actually the human resources to deliver on that, then you fail. And we think that now we have a bbox manual, we have a bbox guide to how we can actually enter a new market and scale up quickly. This is what we think is part of the reason why actually EDF and the likes of Orange have actually chosen us. And we think that now we can actually move and extend our reach in new countries in Africa.
Merci. Monsieur Nakulima.
Okay. Maybe one word, which is partnerships. If you hear what Thomas just said before, bbox is a very innovative company. They came up with an innovative model, but now they're thinking about partnering with EDF, which is a big public utility, which may not have actually the innovativeness of bbox. If you look at a government like Togo, 15 years ago, rural electrification was actually the business of the government. But today, they are thinking about inviting companies that were created in the UK, in Los Angeles, to actually speed up the access. Partnerships also for us, financiers, African Development Bank, you would think that we are a large bank and that we have enough capital to address this type of needs, but actually not. In order to scale up, we need partners like the European Commission to provide us instruments that can reduce the capital consumption. So partnerships, I think, is key in thinking about implementing this. Even in the operations, now companies like bbox, like EDF are also partnering with telecom companies who can provide the mobile banking solutions. So I think partnership is key.
Thank you. And yes, please.
Okay, thank you. I just want to add that, in my perspective, pour nous, il y a une chose qui est importante que tout le monde doit avoir en tête, en fait. L'électrification rurale, contrairement à ce qu'on a pensé jusqu'à présent et ce qu'on essaye de faire au niveau du Togo, et c'est inclus dans notre nouveau plan national de développement porté par le chef de l'État et son gouvernement, c'est de montrer qu'on peut attirer le secteur privé dans des secteurs sociaux. C'est très important parce que sans cela, nous allons parler de grands projets d'infrastructure, nous allons parler de croissance à 2 chiffres, mais nous allons toujours rester butés sur ce qui est essentiel, ce que nous devons apporter en fait à nos populations au jour le jour. En fait. Et c'est ce que nous on a essayé aussi de faire au niveau de l'électrification rurale, c'est de montrer qu'il est possible de faire ce qu'on considérait, comme l'a dit tout à l'heure aussi, ce qu'on considérait comme étant une obligation, quelque chose qui ne devait être fait qu'à faire par le secteur public, de le rendre en fait bankable pour que le secteur privé puisse venir et aider à délivrer cela. Et je pense que c'est très important au niveau de l'Afrique aujourd'hui, que ce soit pour l'électricité, c'est ce qu'on est en train de démontrer, sur l'eau, ce sera important, sur l'éducation, il est important qu'on arrive à inventer des business models nouveaux qui permettent d'attirer le secteur privé et de l'aider à délivrer en fait les besoins de base. Et pour ça, il y a un besoin de continuer à réformer en permanence. C'est pour ça que nous sommes heureux d'être dans le G20 Compactive Africa. C'est pour ça que nous allons continuer à faire les efforts pour continuer à être parmi les top performers également l'année prochaine et continuer à attirer des investisseurs privés aussi bien dans les grands projets d'infrastructure. On a beaucoup de deals dans le domaine des infrastructures, mais aussi dans les secteurs considérés comme sociaux et qui adressent plutôt des populations rurales. Et c'est un élément important parce que quand on parle par exemple d'agriculture, d'accès au financement des populations rurales, c'est un vrai problème aujourd'hui. La plupart des banques vous disent on ne sait pas comment financer ces zones. Ce qu'on est en train de montrer avec les kits solaires, avec l'électrification rurale, c'est que ces populations sont bankable, elles peuvent payer, si on structure bien, elles peuvent être rentables et on peut orienter des financements vers ces zones-là. Demain, on pourra, grâce à ces données, faire des financements agricoles, apporter de la santé avec la couverture maladie, et c'est comme ça qu'on réussira à développer nos pays.
Franchement, oui, c'est essentiel et c'est très bien comme final mot que vous mettez même phase là-bas. Parce qu'il n'y a pas de division, en fait. Monsieur Koons, vous voulez encore?
Oui, je voulais juste ajouter à ce que Shegun a dit, parce que c'est vraiment fondamental, que pour nous, bien évidemment, c'est essentiel. Mon domaine de travail, c'est la politique de développement. Et donc l'argent qu'on engage via la garantie, c'est pour faire la politique de développement. C'est pour aider nos partenaires. Et ce qu'on vient de faire ici, ce qu'on vient de décrire, c'est une révolution. Si on peut financer à travers des initiatives du secteur privé, des projets qui ont une finalité sociale de développement, là on commence à avoir, avec l'aide publique au développement, un effet de levier qui est majeur. Et au lieu de financer des projets où on utilise l'argent et point final, ici on va utiliser l'aide publique au développement avec un effet de levier majeur. C'est un nouveau modèle, un nouveau business model de development policy et c'est majeur. C'est dans ce sens-là aussi que j'applaudis vraiment ce genre de projets qui sont un modèle pour ce que nous voulons faire.
Très bien, oui. Il faut qu'on se souvienne toujours qu'il y a beaucoup d'opportunités économiques, financières dans le secteur social. Et c'est ça. There is not a division. In fact, inclusive business, inclusive investment, socially progressive outcomes, this is where we're seeing double-digit growth, as Shegun was highlighting for us.
And I think Thomas can testimony on this, because I think a lot of the person you are employed in the rural area are women, young people.
That's right. This is how we create the jobs and the inclusive opportunities for women and youth. Yes?
Sure. And yes, absolutely. In Togo, in the space of 1 year, we actually recruited over 150 people, all Togolese, of course. led by Lara Santego, who's the country manager for Togo. So we think it's good, it creates actually new jobs, and specifically in rural areas, which actually is not very easy. So we hope actually we can create a real sector initiative in the solar space. Technicians, salespeople, in many different other sectors. And so that's very important. I'd like to go back actually to the partnership that you just mentioned. Yes, it's a social business. We are actually a private company looking at this business. But I think because of the few things I mentioned before, so the technology, the business model, etc., we have actually managed to attract actually bigger companies, utilities who were not actually looking at this sector a few years ago. And I think this is where it's starting to be really interesting, because now we're actually decoupling what we call the B2B, so actually the sale of hardware and software to the different entities we have in Africa, so Kenya, Rwanda, DRC, and Togo, amongst many others. And we have new investors who are coming at the B2C level, so EDF, for instance, in the case of Togo, Orange, where I'm sure pretty much everyone knows that we have actually recently launched new countries in Western Africa. I can't actually mention the name, but we're about to actually announce a new transaction before the end of this month with one of the biggest African investors. So I think this is key, because the sector which actually was perceived as a kind of new sector or challenging sector a few years ago is now maturing. And I think that's good, because actually it will actually create growth and really aim at serving those unfavored populations in rural areas in Africa.
Well, on that note, and feeling inspired, please join me in thanking our panelists for sharing the story of what Togo and bbox has achieved. Thank you, everyone. With that, we've managed to regain time, and it is 6:30. Thank you all for joining both part 1 and part 2 of the Compact session, and enjoy very much the rest of your evening. Thank you.